me get my notes out. Here we go. We're talking about the Sony RX1 R Mark II. It is a rainy day out there today, and that's why we're in here making this video, because this camera is not weather sealed. And that is one of the negatives about this camera. You see, as much as I love this camera, and as much as I hate this camera, there's still some things that make me take it off the used market every time I list it for sale. And that's what I want to talk about today, the pros and the cons of this camera. And I've been using this camera every single day for the past year. But the whole reason I bought it is because I was looking for the quote-unquote perfect compact travel camera for everyday carry, street, family, and I've even used it on paid jobs because this is the third version of this camera, which if you know anything about that, it means it has a 42 megapixel full frame sensor. It's quite insane. So I wanted to be realistic with all of you who are looking around, maybe considering this camera, because it is still being sold brand new on B&H for $3,300, which is just wow. So as you'll notice, it is all blacked out, and that's because I put a skin on it from AlphaGuard and just completely blacked it out. So now I have my own little miniature Leica Q3. Does this look familiar? Let's get into the pros. Obviously the size, okay? It is very, very compact. Just the camera body alone is smaller than a Fuji X100V, way smaller and lighter than a Leica Q camera. Where it gets bigger than something like an X100V is because of the Zeiss sonar lens that is attached. Now I do have the little hood on there, so if we take the hood off, that does decrease the size a little bit, but you can still see like, yeah, it's still a pretty big lens. But that's because that's a Zeiss sonar 35 f2 with a real macro mode. You know, that's gonna add a little bit of heft to it, but that's about it. It's even cumbersome in a coat pocket. Certainly not a pocketable camera. It's not like a Ricoh GR3X or something like that, but this is going to give you a way better performance for nighttime photography, low light photography, or true macro mode. You know, you're talking about full frame versus APS-C. There's quite a bit of difference there, despite everyone's hot takes. The reality is full frame will always win in terms of depth of field and low light performance. You will never convince me or a lot of other people otherwise. So bouncing off of that, let's keep talking about this lens, because the lens is actually what makes the RX1 camera so unique, much in the same fashion how the Leica 28 Summilux is what makes the Leica Q camera so unique. Every time you have a fixed lens camera, that's what really makes the image so unique and so special. Everywhere you look online, the #1 word that you will come across the most when talking about the images that come out of the RX1 is sublime. For whatever reason, sublime is the word that seems to fall across the reviews the most. Now, I had to look that word up because where I come from, Sublime is a band. But the reality is the lens is really what makes this camera. But specifically, when Sony combined this lens with this 42 megapixel full frame sensor in this third version is really when these RX1s came to life, in my opinion. And don't forget, you do have the macro mode. But here's the thing, you know, the macro, it only close focuses up to 0.2 meters. Now, without the macro mode, we can get as close as 0.3 meters. So it's not that big of a difference, in my opinion. Also, we're gonna get a little bit into the negatives here, but when you're in macro mode, the autofocus goes haywire. So the autofocus is useless when you're in macro mode, so just keep that in mind. I would have preferred a lens that wasn't macro, and that way we could have had a more pancake-style Zeiss sonar lens on here, maybe, and that would have made it a little bit more smaller and compact. That's just my opinion on it. But macro's cool, you know, it's fun for food or flowers or weird Etsy shots, I guess, because remember, it is 42 megapixels. It's cool to have the option, I guess. All right, bouncing off of that, I did mention the autofocus, and the autofocus is amazing in this specific third version of the RX1. Again, we're talking about the RX1 R Mark II. That's when Sony introduced phase detect autofocus into these RX1 cameras, and not only that, but now we have continuous phase detect autofocus along with face and eye tracking. A lot of people don't mention this, but this camera has all of those things. That's why it blows the X100V out of the water, and it even outperforms the Q2 in terms of autofocus as well, because the Q2 is only contrast detect. Phase detect is a big bonus when we're talking about autofocus performance, and Sony has always been the leaders of that. And even though this is older technology in terms of Sony autofocus, we're talking about 2015, I showed in my initial review how it still has a really high hit rate. So if you're coming off of a Leica camera or a Fuji camera, the autofocus out of this RX1 R II is still going to impress the hell out of you. This is a full frame 42 megapixel 8K sensor. It's an insane sensor. Now, the reality is it is still the older Sony color science. Nobody is a fan of that, so that is a little bit of a bummer. So just always shoot RAW. I only shoot RAW. Now, before I got this camera, I had only ever used cameras up to 24 megapixels. But the reality is once you start using 42 megapixels, it's insane. Look at this shot right here. This just gives you an example of, one, how I always carried my camera with me everywhere I went, and two, the resolution and detail. This was taken from behind the steering wheel of my car through the windshield, okay? I was on an overpass out in Pasadena. I was on the phone with my sister, and my wife was in the car with me, so I'm having a conversation with 3 people at once, and all of a sudden I look over and I see this cop chasing this man across the bridge, and I always have my camera right between my legs, so I just picked it up, boom, one shot, okay? And this is another testament to the autofocus of this camera. All the images that I've been showing you so far, those were in single drive mode. Okay, I'm not a spray and pray kind of shooter. I shoot in a very analog fashion, even with these digital cameras. I always have my drive mode in single shot. So I think that alone also is testament to how good the autofocus is on this camera. This was the first and only shot I took of these guys chasing each other. And here's the original image, so you can see how much I cropped into that. So not only am I shooting through the front windshield, which probably wasn't very clean to be honest with you, and also I always have kept a Tiffin Black Satin 3 on the front of this lens. It's on there right now. The majority of these photos, I'll probably say all of these photos, have been used with the Tiffin Black Satin 3. Now a Black Satin 3, some would say, oh my gosh, that's a really heavy diffusion, but it's really not, especially when you consider the pupil size of the front of this Zeiss lens. Okay, the front pupil of this lens is very small, and one of my DP friends here in LA, he was telling me like that's probably why it doesn't seem that heavy on that little lens, because the smaller the front element of the lens is, you know, the less the heavy density of diffusion is going to impact it. In other words, if you were to put a Tiffin Black Satin 3 on the front of a big cine lens like a Zeiss CP3, well then you're really going to be able to see way more of what that diffusion filter is doing, because the front element of a Zeiss CP3 is like 4 or 5 times the size of this little Zeiss sonar lens, okay? But man, the resolution and detail is just insane out of this camera. And that goes in line with the low light performance as well. When I'm out on the street, I always have my auto ISO capped out at 3200. So I've never shot above 3200 because that is the cleanest it is. And I only know that really because of not only my own testing, but also because of the DxO scores of this camera. I like to go for as clean as I can. So obviously you can push that all the way to something insane like 12,000 or something like that. But I have no desire to do that because it's very clean. So I mentioned it before, and yes, this is a big deal for me. Tilt screen is a must for me when I'm out on the street. That is one of the main things that I was looking for when I was looking for a compact everyday carry. And now that we have that out of the Q3, that's pretty amazing. However, that's a $6,000 fixed lens camera. However, it is a Leica, I understand. And I do want to point out that this, as a street photographer, I much prefer a tilt screen rather than a flippy vloggy screen. So here's my little quick short rant on why I don't like the A7CR. Because I was considering swapping this RX1 R II for the A7CR, mainly so I could swap different focal lengths and use my M-mount glass on the A7CR. But why the hell they chose to put a flippy vloggy screen on a camera that is primarily focused towards photographers? I don't know too many photographers that like walking around with a flippy vlog out screen. And then they say, well, just use the EVF. Well, the little pop-out EVF that's in this little camera from 2015 is the same exact EVF that's in your brand new A7CR and the A7C II for that matter. These EVFs are not great, certainly not for photography, okay? Now, it's cool that they've included it on this little camera, even cooler that we can put it away, but again, same magnification, same resolution as the A7CR. I don't understand why they didn't put a tilt screen on that camera. On the A7C II, it makes sense because we have way better video capabilities on that one. But again, the A7CR for photography, why not a tilt screen? Or better yet, why not put the awesome screen that's on the A7R5? But it is what it is. I guess they only want to upcharge you for higher megapixels. Let's get into the cons, because there are a pretty long list of cons. It is a fixed lens camera, okay? And after being stuck with this for a year, I don't know. I know a lot of diehard photographers are like, just get used to the one focal length. Yeah, I get that. I understand that philosophy. I can get behind that teaching. But the reality is that sometimes we need other focal lengths, you know? It does the same thing that the Leica Q cameras does. You can do the clear image zoom, and with this one, since it's 42 megapixels, you can go all the way up to a 50 mil or a 75 mil full frame equivalent, and literally anything in between. The downside with that is, and this is also true of the Leica Q cameras, you can only take advantage of those clear zoom image options if you shoot in JPEG. So if you're in RAW, it's not going to allow you to actually take those images by, cropping in camera, right? And that's literally all you're doing anyways. You're just cropping in. Every great cinematographer has taught us a 35 is a 35 is a 35, or with the Leica Qs, a 28 is a 28 is a 28, right? It doesn't matter how much you're zooming in or cropping in. It's always going to have the characteristics and performance of the actual focal length that it is. So that's a big thing to consider here. And people don't talk about that. They just act like, oh, I got all these focal lengths in this. No, you don't. It's still the same lens that's on there in terms of depth of field, the physical characteristics of the lens, right? There's a big reason why a lot of models don't like portraits being taken of them on a wide angle lens. Even if you want to zoom in on it and pretend that it's a 75 mil, it's not. Fixed lens cameras are very, very limiting. Now, my biggest complaint about the lens is the fact that it's focused by wire. I absolutely hate that, and this one is really, really bad. And you will find everywhere on the forums that all 3 versions of the RX1, the manual focus of these little lenses, they fail. They will eventually fail. And mine is still going strong. However, it is weird. The manual focus is finicky because it's focused by wire. The best way to do it is I've programmed this C1 button to be my toggle switch to turn on manual focus mode, and I always have my peaking on when I hit that switch. So then, I just find in the focus scale where I want to be, and then I just kind of let it land and then take the shot. But it's a big pain in the ass. I hate focus by wire, and this one is really bad. It's really, really bad. The overall build quality is concerning to me as well. Okay, this being a $3,300 camera, and it is not dust proof, it is not weather sealed. Boy, that's a big problem. And there are holes all over this camera, okay? You have speaker holes on the bottom, you have microphone holes on the top. This pop-out EVF, every time you push it in and out, you're pulling stuff down into the camera body. The macro lens, every time you push this on and off, you're sucking things down into the lens and then essentially hitting the sensor because this lens is attached to the sensor. That's with all fixed lens cameras. When you flip out the screen, there's some little holes there. I mean, there are holes everywhere. And for a camera that is not weather sealed or dust proof, man, that's a big bummer. And in my research, I have found where Sony charges $1,000 to clean the sensor on these little cameras. It is insane to me. That to me is the biggest bummer. Okay, the other thing is that it is a necessity to use the real thumbs up, okay? So you can see that this camera has nowhere to hold it, and it's very, very tiny. And I have piano player hands, so men with much larger hands than me, they're gonna even have a much harder time with this little camera. So that's why I have said from the beginning that you must use the real Match Technical thumbs up, okay? And I know this is a $200 accessory. A lot of people don't think it's worth it, but as you'll notice, first of all, it's real brass, and it does get natural patina. I absolutely love that. But the biggest bonus is that it gives you 2 different placements for your thumb, but more importantly, you still will have access to both your playback button and your shutter wheel. Okay, I've seen a lot of YouTubers complaining that, oh, this camera doesn't have a shutter dial. That's literally what this wheel is on the back of the camera. I assume they either don't know that or they're covering it up with some cheap generic Amazon wannabe thumbs up that they've used, because there's a lot of wannabe thumbs ups out there and they all cover up this shutter wheel. And play it smart, and man, the real thumbs up are so good. They're so awesome. I've already talked about the little crappy EVF. I mean, it's not great. It's like a 0.7 magnification, 2.36 million dots. For a camera like this, it's cool that we have it, right? But again, it's not that great. Kind of a bummer about this camera is, since it is older, there's not a joystick on it, and that is a bummer for, if you're in expanded spot mode and you're not able to move the spot around, you do have to use the old school D-pad with it. And I even saw some newer videos of people talking about selling their Leica Q3 because it doesn't have a joystick. So that is interesting. The $6,000 Q3 left out the joystick as well, but that is a pain in the ass, if you want to rely on your expanded spot for autofocus. And certainly for this camera, the autofocus is so good on it, so you are going to have to move your spot around, your AF spot, with the little D-pad. It's just old school, but it is a little bit of a pain in the neck. Me, though, I just always leave it in continuous autofocus mode. That's going to eat up your battery. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I always leave continuous autofocus mode on, and I always have face and eye tracking on. Okay, both those are going to kill your little battery, but I just always do that, and then I just leave the focus mode in wide, and I've been able to hit all these shots in single drive mode that I've been showing you, so it just goes to show how badass the autofocus is on this old camera. Another quick little con that I find about this camera is that the little on and off switch, it's very easy to flip this camera on and off. Now you'll notice I have this little soft shutter button on here. Plenty of times I've taken this out of my bag and the camera's already been on, and it's like, oh boy. And it's just because that switch, it really doesn't have a whole lot of dampening to it, so it's very easy to flick it on when you don't want it to be on, which is a bummer because of the very poor battery life. So let's get into that. That is the first Achilles heel of this camera. Everyone knows that. That's what everyone talks about, and it's because this is little baby cameras. I talked about that in my initial review. I have 4 of the OEM Sony batteries. I've never used generic batteries. It's important to get the OEM ones because they come with these little travel chargers, as I talked about in the original video. The downside is these batteries take 3 hours to charge. It's so insane to me. I don't understand why they take so long to charge. And it's a bummer because you can easily drain these in 45 minutes flat, easily. Now, some ways to preserve that battery life: keep your camera in airplane mode. You'd be surprised how much battery you can save by putting your camera into airplane mode. You could turn off continuous autofocus. You could turn off face and eye tracking. I don't recommend that though, because this camera is just so good with those modes. But if you wanted to preserve it, you could turn all that off. The biggest way that I've been able to preserve power is I always have my EVF popped up and my LCD screen off. And as I talked about in my initial review, I programmed the down button on the D-pad to toggle between the screen and the EVF. So in other words, if I take a picture, it doesn't pop up and show me the picture I've taken. Again, I like to operate in kind of an analog fashion. So that's how I do it. You know, I keep the screen off, I keep preview off, I don't chimp, and I keep it in airplane mode. What is the biggest Achilles heel of this camera that nobody really talks about? And I think it's because you really only find out about it the more you use it. And this one really drives me nuts. It's the most annoying about this camera. And that's that they put the record button right on the side of the camera. It's the dumbest position. I don't know what technician thought it would be a great idea to put that record button right on the side of the camera, but it's heinous, and you will hit it constantly. This is another reason to buy the real thumbs up, because the way the thumbs up is designed, they actually designed it really smart. It actually swoops out and kind of forces your thumb away from that record button. But you see, without that thumbs up, you will definitely hit it. So anytime I'm using a flash head on this, because I actually use the flash with this quite a lot, because they put the record button right under where your palm goes. In the toughest, strongest part of our hands is right where they put the record button. The dumbest thing. So what happens is you're going to go to take a shot and it's not going to let you. And you're going to be like, why the hell it won't let me take a shot? And you'll notice down on the bottom of the screen, it'll say REC because it's been recording a movie the whole time. Or you can go into the menus and disable the record button. The downside is every time you accidentally hit it, you're going to get a dialog box and you're still going to miss the shot. So either way, whether you have this record button disabled or not, you will miss the shot because the dialog box stays up there for about 3 or 4 seconds. So it's the dumbest thing. It's the most annoying thing about this camera. Okay, so let's back up and I want to talk about the number 2 biggest reasons why I love this camera and why I just can't let it go. And maybe you guys can help me find some other solutions that have the similar options, although I do think already I know what those are. The biggest reason why I love this camera so much is the leaf shutter. And not a lot of cameras have leaf shutters anymore because everybody has jumped the boat to electronic shutters. And that just breaks my heart because I absolutely hate electronic shutters. I hate them so much. There's so many issues with electronic shutters, and I wish more cameras would get back to using leaf shutters. From what I can find, the only cameras that still use leaf shutters besides the RX1 is like the X100V, the Leica Q cameras, or like a more expensive digital medium format camera, which is insane because now you're talking about big money. And you say, why do you love the leaf shutter, Justin, so much? 2 big reasons why leaf shutter is amazing. The first one is they're perfect for street. Can you even hear that? It's so quiet. I absolutely love it. I wish someone would do a comparison between a leaf shutter and the Leica M10P or the M10R because, you know, I know this is crazy. I've been looking at those cameras and the M10P is supposed to be the quietest Leica M ever. And then they put that same dampened shutter in the M10R. And I'm really curious, like, is it still quieter than a leaf shutter or is it the same or is it louder than a leaf shutter? I'm so curious. So if any of you out there have an M10P or an M10R, please, I would love to know if you could get your hands on a leaf shutter camera and compare it. That's what I really want to know because I love the leaf shutter for street. It is so quiet. And when I turn on the screen, I just tilt it like this. And then, I'm just like this. And then, I get my frame and I take the shot and no one knows. I mean, here's the thing. I was recently on a job because I have been hired a few times to be a set photographer. Not a BTS photographer, but a set photographer. There's a little bit of a difference there. Some people think they're the same position, but they're actually not. A set photographer, in my experience, I actually take photos mainly for the purpose of like marketing purposes, you know, for the actors, portraits of the actors. And in one little job I worked on, they actually used some of the photos in the film. So it's pretty rad. I've stood right next to the sound guy and been firing off this leaf shutter, and they've never paid me any mind. So I find that really, really awesome. The leaf shutter is just amazing for street, on set, apparently. Any kind of quiet operation. Wedding guys would be into it. If you're in a church or something, it's really great for stealth. Okay, now here's the biggest bonus of when you have a leaf shutter. You will be able to use your flash at any shutter speed that the camera can do. As I talked about in my initial review, these shots were taken ripped wide open f2 with the shutter speed of 1/2000. And that's with the flash sync speed matching the shutter speed at 1/2000. So there's no Photoshop magic, there's no HDR tricks to this. I don't know how to do all that stuff. This is straight out of camera. That's what you can do with an amazing leaf shutter. You know, your flash sync speed is to the moon. The fact that this camera's maximum shutter speed is 1/4000, well, that's what you can put the flash to. So it's pretty rad, man. The negatives I have about this camera have been holding me back. And honestly, it's not quite compact enough, but I know if I want to sacrifice for super compact, I'm gonna have to go for a smaller sensor, and that's something I can't really jump on right now. But the other things that I'm looking at, you know, I need a tilt screen. I don't want a flippy vlog screen. I want the tilt screen. I do like having the ability to have an EVF every now and then, but again, man, it comes down to that leaf shutter, super stealth. One of the downsides of running around with the Leica M8, two reasons why the Leica rangefinders are kind of a pain in the ass for street photography, because they look so old now. They're almost like the opposite of what they used to be. There was a time when Leica rangefinders were like the main street photography camera, but we're in an era now where they catch everyone's eye just because of how old and vintage they look. Even the modern ones, even the M11 still looks like the old school ones. So they catch everyone's eye. You have to bring it up to your eye to take the shot. I mean, unless you want to shoot from the hip, but then you really don't. You're just shooting blind at that point. I mean, and specifically with the M8 has one of the loudest shutters in the world because it's so old, you know? There's certain things that I love using out on the street. The leaf shutter, the tilt screen, it is pretty small. And the fact that I've blacked it out, you know, helps it out. I mean, people, you know, if I have this with an all black jacket on, you're not even gonna really see this camera, you know, like it's so rad. I'm not saying that I'm getting rid of this, but I have, and people here that watch my channel, they know, like, hey, he had that listed for sale. I constantly have it up for sale, and then I'll take it down. I'll use it for a while, and then I'll go, you know, hitting that record button will piss me off, or something will make me mad about the poor battery life. Something will piss me off, and then I'll put it back up for sale. And then someone will be down to buy it, and then I'll be like, it's not available right now. You know, so that's the battle I'm at with this little camera. I really, truly have a love-hate relationship with this camera like I've never had with any other camera ever. It is quite bizarre to me. I usually don't care about cameras because I really just look at them as tools. Because there is no perfect camera, right? There just isn't, and I hope this helped you all out. For my Patreon members, or any of you wanting to join the Patreon, we are diving into the second week of looking at the Warner Brothers Wonder Boy shoot that I was the DP on. Very ultra low budge pilot, but we've been having fun shooting it. Shot 2 episodes now, so we're still breaking down episode 2 over there on the Patreon. Check us out if you're into cinematography, behind the scenes, patreon.com/JustinPhillip. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. That's a big fat wrap. Thank you. Let's hope I don't lose any subscribers on this. It seems like every time I do a hot take, my honest opinions after using a camera for a while, I always lose some subscribers, and they say, I think you know why I'm unsubscribing. Okay, because I'm being real with you and I'm caring about people's decisions and choices that they make. All right, whatever, to each their own.